So you've talked a lot before about the GI Joe situation, where they came to you, they want you to be GI Joe. Vince doesn't want you to go for it, so you leave. But one of the parts of the story that's interesting is that he'd signed the deal with LJN, but to combat you leaving and going to GI Joe, he said, "We're going to do an LJN Sgt Slaughter." Why was that not enough to get you to stay?
Well, he didn't do the LJN. Hasbro did. They when they heard the story that of what happened and that he had actually made prototypes and ordered I think it was 300,000 Sgt Slaughter LJNs. But when he found out that he didn't own the rights to Sgt Slaughter, and I had left, he put them all in I heard he threw them in a incinerator and burnt them. That's what I was told, but I'm not sure if he would be that stupid, but they'd be worth a lot of money. But so when Hasbro heard that story, they said, "Oh, well, we'll go ahead and make the same thing that LJN did, but we're going to make them just a little bit bigger than theirs, and we're going to promote it that Sgt Slaughter's LJN is a lot better than the LJN. The Hasbro prototype is better." So that's how that happened. That Hasbro actually did it. You couldn't buy it in stores. You had to basically order it through mail, and that's how that started.
But when you left, because you wanted to be GI Joe, you got the offer to do it. Vince ended up suing you. You countersued him. How did it get so bad that you ended up suing each other?
Well, because he thought he owned the name Sgt Slaughter. In 1974, when I created Sgt Slaughter, a friend of mine was in the Army. He was a major, and he said, "You should trademark your name." And I said, "Why would I trademark my name?" And he said, "Because someday down the road, if you really become quite famous, you might need to protect that." And I said, "Well, it's a lot of work to do." He said, I'll do it for you. All you got to do is sign it." I said, "Oh, if you want to do it, I'll do it." So then he got it all ready. I signed it and never had to use it until the time that Vince brought me into his office one Saturday morning and started showing me all the prototypes. Andre and myself, all the wrestlers, Iron Sheik and Big John Studd and all the wrestlers. And he said, "This is the future." And I said, "Oh, great. What did we get out of that? What did the wrestlers get out of that?" And he said, "Don't worry, pal. You're gonna do okay." I said, "What's okay?" "Don't worry, pal. You're gonna make lots of money." I said, "Well, what is that figure? What are you talking about? What percentage?" "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." So I told my friend, who was my attorney, and he said, "Well, we should go find out what that is, what the percentage is." So I take him into Vince's office another time, and Vince hated attorneys, and so he was mad at me to bring an attorney in. So we're sitting around, and finally, it was about 5 or 6 employees with the WWE, big brass guys, and so he kept saying, we're gonna do this and do that with this Sarge and this and that. And my attorney said, "Well, wait a minute. How can you do that without his permission?" "Boy, I don't need his permission. I created Sgt Slaughter. I made Sgt Slaughter. I'll tell him what to do, and he'll do what I tell him to do." And my attorney said, "No, you can't do that. You don't own Sgt Slaughter." He said, "I own Sgt Slaughter. And you, Sarge, why do you bring these guys in here? All they want is your money. All they want to do is screw you and do this and that." So my attorney opens up his briefcase, and he has some papers. And Vince stands up now, and he's pointing at my attorney. "You're this, you're that, you're this, you're that." And my attorney was a collegiate national wrestling champion. And so he grabbed Vince's finger, and he started bending it back like that, and Vince was on his toes like that. And he finally let go. He said, "Number one, Vince, Get your effing finger out of my face. He used a different word. And secondly, you don't own Sgt Slaughter. Robert Remus owns Sgt Slaughter. I own Sgt Slaughter. I own Sgt Slaughter. My attorney handed him the paper. Vince started reading it, and he goes, "This meeting's dismissed. All you employees into the conference room immediately. Get in there." Now, I didn't know that he had already ordered all these figures, you know. And so he found out he ordered something that he didn't own. And it really, you know, didn't go well. So that's when the war started between Vince and I and my attorney, and that's when the lawsuit started and back and forth. That he kept saying that he made Sgt Slaughter. I said, no, it's right here. 1974, I owned Sgt Slaughter. And so it just, he didn't like to be told what to do. It still doesn't, so.
So when you left in 1984, you come back in 1990, but for that whole 6 years, you never went to the NWA, to Crockett, during that time. And I feel like everybody would think you would have gone there because you were Sgt Slaughter, you were such a big name. Why did you never end up going there?
Well, for some reason, I was loyal to Mr. McMahon Sr. And I always, a day and a half before he died, we were in New Haven Coliseum, and I went out to my car to get something, and there was a payphone there, and Arnold Skolin, who was his right-hand man, was on the phone, and he said, "Sergeant, come here. Somebody wants to say hello to you." I said, "Hello? Oh, Sergeant, this is Vince McMahon." And Arnold said, "He's dying. He's dying." I said, "Oh, Mr. McMahon, it's good to, you know." And so he said, "As long as there's a WWF, you always have a job. I love you. You're the best. You really are the best." And I, okay. So that always was in my heart, that I was loyal to him, not so much the company or Vince Jr., but I was loyal to him, and so I never went away. When we had the war going on with the WCW, I got calls by Eric Bischoff. I got 2 calls from Jimmy Hart and 2 calls from Hulk Hogan. "You got to come in. You got to come in. Name your price. Name your price. I want you to join the NWO. We'll blow the WWF out of the business." And I kept saying, "Well, thanks for the offer. I'll give it some thought. But I never mentioned it to Vince or anything. I just told my wife I got this offer. She said, "What are you going to do? You going to take it?" I said, "Nah, I can't do it." So I never went.
And you've told the famous story about you saw WrestleMania 6, you write Vince a letter, and that ends up with you going back to WWF. Do you think when you wrote the letter to Vince, was that basically a way in your mind of thinking, I want to go back, I want to be a part of it again?
Well, I was always wanted to leave the door open, but I just wrote the letter because I was so impressed with the show. Wasn't so impressed with the wrestlers of the matches, but his production was incredible. I couldn't believe it. Looked like 1 million people were in the audience. There was probably 75,000. Which is a pretty good thing in Toronto on WrestleMania 6. But it looked like 1 million people were in the audience because he had taken, for 6 years, he had upped his production so well that I was just like, my mouth was like dropped open watching the show. But I didn't think that I would get back by sending a letter. I just figured I'd tell him what I thought. And lo and behold, he took it the other way and called me about 2 weeks later and wanted to know if I wanted to go back to work.